I'm Margaret Bauer. I'm the editor of the North Carolina Literary Review, one of your hosts. And except for Christy's dad, who's here, I'm Christy's biggest fan. Or maybe not. I see lots of Christy fans out here, including her former professor, Alex Albright, who tells me she's his first comp student to publish a novel. Let's take a second while we have Alex here in person to congratulate him on his most recent award, the John Tyler Caldwell Award for the Humanities. This is the highest honor North Carolina Humanities gives. Alex, wave, stand up, give him a round of applause.
Christy was a great student in one of my very first English classes here, and I have remembered her. I remembered her for a long time before I met her again and realized how great she was again.
Wonderful. If you missed Alex's ceremony, you can watch it online from North Carolina Humanities YouTube channel. As always, he was insightful and inspiring. Anyway, I know you're all as excited as Alex, Christy's dad, and I are about Christy's new fast-selling novel. We're also happy for you, Christy. Every time I see another good review come out, I do a little cartwheel in my head. Anyway, my job here tonight is just to welcome you, give thanks, and do my usual NCLR promotion, got to do that, and then turn the program over to Randall. So welcome, and thank you for coming. Thank you to the English department for sponsoring this event along with NCLR. We appreciate Joyner Library for hosting us, especially Charlotte Fitz-Daniels, who answers our request for such things so quickly and enthusiastically. Thank you, Charlotte. And she always makes sure we have everything we need. Thanks to Dowdy Student Stores for coming to sell Christy's book here tonight. And I'm going to say one more thing about Christy before introducing our moderator. Christy has volunteered her service to NCLR for some decades now, and she was on Alex's staff as a student, I think. She reads manuscripts, a lot of them. She interviews writers. She attends events as exhibitor and moderator, making sure we reach Western North Carolina even in the middle of the week before Zoom. As senior associate editor, Christy also reads behind my introductions and our press releases, and I can trust she will be brutally candid with her editing, even of me, and often comically candid. And did I mention this is all voluntary on top of a heavy teaching load? To show our thanks for her incredible service, we are giving away a copy of the 2020 issue, which includes one of her amazing interviews with another rock and roll novelist, Jeff Jackson, to anyone who has her book with them tonight or buys a book tonight. So be sure to pick up a copy and then go over to our table over there and get a copy of the 2020 issue from the NCLR staff students. They will, I have to give you a little bit of fair warning. Christy's interviews are so good that afterwards you're going to be placing an order for another book of Jeff Jackson's novel. So also thank you to the student staff here this evening, past, present, and future. Some of our spring interns came to see what we do. The students are ready to sell you a subscription to NCLR this evening, and we hope you'll show your support of ECU's award-winning literary magazine by purchasing a subscription, and we will give you a free copy of the 2021 issue, the 30th issue that was published in the middle of a pandemic. And coincidentally, I swear, it focuses on writing toward healing. We had picked that topic 2 years before. So thanks to all of the English faculty who volunteer their service to NCLR, one of whom, the one who has done so the longest, is our moderator tonight. NCLR Assistant Editor Randall Martoccia. Randall is a Greenville native with a UNC undergraduate degree and a master's from right here at ECU. He's been teaching in the English department ever since, and in fact found himself sharing an office with none other than his Rose High School classmate, Christy Alexander, when he first got here. So, of course, he is the perfect person to introduce her to you this evening. Thank you, Randall. The floor is yours. Y'all come on up.
entirely sure this thing's working.
Let me say, if you guys push the button down and it goes green, it's working.
Okay.
Hold it down, hold it down, and let it go.
Hey!
Testing, testing.
First off, I've always wanted to do this. Hello, Greenville! Now, that might not be appropriate in most occasions, but this is a rock and roll novel that we're going to be talking about today, so hope that works. Yeah, as Margaret said, I've known Christy. We were high school classmates. Actually, 7th grade maybe was when we met. In high school, we were definitely in different circles. Oh, Walcoats? Oh, all the way back. Wow. We were definitely in different circles in high school. My circle was mainly a bunch of guys passing around a 2-liter of Sun Country wine cooler, I think. And meanwhile, Christy was editing the school newspaper, The Rampant Lines, performing in plays for the drama club, and preparing to write a novel. I don't really mean she was actually planning it out from 18 years old or whatever, but that's the thing with artists. Every interaction, every experience, every dream has the potential to be material for a scene, a character detail, a plot point, an image, and that's why you got to be careful when you hang around with writers. But and I definitely, when I was reading her book, I was definitely had to kind of hold myself back from spending the whole time looking for real life analogs, like, hey, who's the bully? Is that based on somebody I know? And who's Connie based on? Or those kind of questions. But yeah, as you can see, I was not always resisting that urge very well, right? So yeah, our friendship definitely forged when we became office mates in the year 2000. And during the 2000s, Christy was a bridesmaid at my wedding. My wife, Christy Martoccia, officiated Christy's wedding to Bill Hallberg. And so we've been friends, very close friends ever since. One thing that, we both are fixed-term faculty members, which means we teach 4 classes. And 4 classes are usually writing intensive. And just to be able to get an MFA, Christy got an MFA in, I think, 2005, and to then write a novel with a job that's basically can be all-consuming. Well, just have incredible respect for that. And when the news of her novel, that she got the book that was going to be published and all that, when that came out, there was basically cheers in my house. Because we knew the work that she put into it, and we knew how much that Christy wanted it. So I just want to end with one of my words from one of my favorite writers and favorite people. So just sit with me for a second here. So one of the most important things to remember about anything you do in life is that you must take pride in the goals you set to accomplish. Simply wanting something is not what makes people successful. Concentrate on your abilities and perform to the level of those abilities. So those words actually appear in Christy's goodbye letter to the Rampant Lines that she wrote when she was 18.
Oh my God.
And I have to think that younger version of herself would agree that she performed to the level of her ability, and that she definitely should take pride in the goal that she accomplished. And I think also, she's basically, when she wrote those words, she was at the same age as her character, her protagonist of her novel. And I have to think that all involved would approve of Jimmy Page, of Led Zeppelin playing a big part of that novel. So Christy, welcome to your victory trip back to Greenville.
Okay, I'm going to cry. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you, Randall, so much. And you have been a dear friend, and Christy too, for so long. And so it's so great for you to be up here with me as my security blanket through this, because I am very nervous. And I thank you, Margaret, for everything you've done. Alex, I'm so thrilled that you're here. Eliza, I'm just going to go down. Luke, thanks for being here. Monica Leggett is here. Yes, I've known her longer than you have. We have known each other since we were like kindergarten, first grade, and she is here. And when she reads the book, I am fully expecting emails of, I know who that is. I know who did that. So oh dear, that's probably coming. But thank you, Joyner Library. Thank you, NCLR. Thank you, English Department. And this is really an amazing moment. And thank you, Dad, Rudy Alexander, for roping in so many people from Cypress Glen to come and welcome. And yeah, this is great. So Randall and I we're just going to have a good time here. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to read a little bit, and you're just the perfect person to do it because you've been with me on this ride for a long time. So I'll let you carry it on.
And the first question is basically, I'm not acknowledging that, I think you've been working on some version of the novel for almost as long as our sort of new friendship since the 2000. And so can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for your story?
Well, I've been a fan of Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, and maybe I should start off because I know there are people who don't know who he is. And I did a reading at Hudson Library a couple weeks ago, and nobody knew who he was. So I thought, okay, I should probably start with that. Does anybody not know who he is? Okay. All right. Do you know the band Led Zeppelin from the 70s, Stairway to Heaven? He's the founding member and the guitarist and producer for that group. And I'd always been around the music. I have an older brother, Steve, who's 10 years older, and he was a rock drummer, a very good rock drummer around town. And I just thought he was so cool. And he really dug Led Zeppelin and the drummer, John Bonham. And that's sort of how I got into it. It was kind of a connection to him. And I always knew that I would write about Jimmy Page in some capacity at some point. So when I started my MFA in 2003, I had to write an MFA creative thesis, which was a novel. And it was a very different version of what it became, but he was at the center of it. And then my mom got sick, and she knew I was working on this, and she made me promise that I would finish it. And she passed away in 2003, and I did finish my MFA, and I did finish that version of the book, but then I didn't do anything with it because I was just creatively drained after she died. So I really didn't write much at all during that period. And then you all know Bill Hallberg, who used to teach in the English department. I know a lot of you do. Well, we got together and got married, and it was just like I was enjoying coming back to life and that relationship. And so I didn't write a whole lot during our time together. I wrote some, but unfortunately he got sick too. And he always loved the story that I used to tell him about when I went to England in 2005. So my mother had died in 2003, and I was really struggling with that. And I finally came to the conclusion I needed to do something out of character to kind of jolt myself back into the land of the living. And I heard about this guitar contest that Jimmy Page and Brian May of Queen were judging in England in 2005. And I thought, that's it. I'll go and do that. I'll go and see if I can make contact with Jimmy Page in some capacity, not in an icky, yuck way. And, he had become kind of the gatekeeper to healing for me. And there's a story behind that I'll tell in a bit. And I'd never been out of the country. I didn't have a passport or anything, but I got one, and I got a ticket to this thing. And I went, and I thought, well, this will be easy. I bought the VIP ticket. I'm going to get to go backstage. I can hand him a chapter from my novel in progress and meet him, and this won't be a big deal. Well, it was. He was not accessible, and so I wound up doing something very out of character. He was leaving at the end, and I realized I'm never going to be in this moment again. I'm never going to have this chance again. So I just started chasing him down the hall. And I chased him all the way to the stairway where he was going to go down to a car park, and wound up screaming at him, "Jimmy, I came all the way from America just to meet you." And he stopped for a second and looked at me, and his bodyguard's tapping him on the shoulder like, we need to go down. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "I'm sorry." And that was my meeting with Jimmy Page, but in my mind that counts as one. So I have met Jimmy Page. And Bill always liked that story, and he said, "You need to write a book about it." So I promised him I would. So now I've got two promises to keep, one to Mom, one to Bill. And Bill passed away in 2014, and rather than go back into the bell jar like I had done with Mom when she died, I just turned to art to heal. And I wrote furiously. But what I wrote was a memoir about that experience. And then I realized, and Margaret, bless her heart, read every chapter in draft form of that version of the story. And I think she was mortified when I finished it and said to her one day, "I think this is really a grief therapy tool. I don't think this needs to go out." And she was like, "Okay, all right." And then I said, "I think it needs to be a novel." And I remember you were like, "Well, how are you going to do that?" So I spent the next couple years doing that and figuring that out. And this is what it became. So this version of the story is set primarily in the winter of 1988. And we have an 18-year-old protagonist, Luna Kane, and we follow her from her family's farm in eastern North Carolina. The first half of the book takes place in eastern North Carolina. We follow her from her farm to England to hunt down Jimmy Page to solve a mystery that her mother, her deceased free-spirited mother, very unlike mine, set in motion when Luna was a child. Is Jimmy Page her father? So that is the premise of this book, and I thought to kick things off, I'd read that very short first chapter. So I think I can do this here. Need some water. The night my great-grandfather died, frigid air howled through the pines and swirled down the chimney of his shack near our fallow tobacco fields in eastern North Carolina. My grandmother and I kept vigil at his bedside, a battery-operated space heater oscillating at our feet, kerosene lamps lofting shadows on the walls. He'd refused to install electricity and insisted the fireplace remain unlit at night. He claimed spirits talked to him through the flue at the witching hour. So did birds, especially owls. He said they were good omens, unless they flew inside your house. Owl in the house means death's coming, he'd say. I lolled my head against the wall, bare like all the others. No family portraits, or prosaic artwork or thumbtacked greeting cards with snapshots of my great-grandfather's progeny tucked inside. The shack was cluttered with clothes and other debris from a fading life, but the walls were naked. He preferred it that way. No memories or illusions, except the ones that came to him at night. At the stroke of 12, he wrapped his knotty fingers around my wrist and squeezed. "Can you hear it?" he asked, his voice like winter wind crackling through kindling. An icy shiver ran through me. He had not spoken since that balmy summer night when I was 9 years old, when the river ran dry and the pines began to cry, the night my mother committed suicide, an abomination he'd called it, a sin against Providence. He'd sat expressionless in his rocking chair while Grandma delivered the news, his face bathed in candlelight, then hobbled into the woods and chanted my mother's name, like an incantation, a prayer for deliverance, that he'd spoken no more. I inched closer to him, close enough to smell the implacable stench of the dying. "Hear what?" I asked timorously. "Owls," he said, "like music." My body fluttered, as if I were falling out of oblivion, slowly, unwittingly, the air prickly and thin. Long ago I'd heard a song about owls crying in the night, the singer's wail primeval, in sync with marauding guitar licks, the beat like jungle drums. I felt them vibrating inside me just then, like a distant echo from another life, one that still included my mother. "Can you hear the music?" he persisted, struggling to raise his head. Grandma implored me with her eyes. I can hear it, Granddaddy. He gave a shuddering laugh. Ain't in your head, girl. Where then? I waited, watching his chest rise and fall, his fitful breast grow shallow, the caesura between life and death. It's in your soul, he finally said. He nudged his Bible beside him, giving voice to verse. Ecclesiastes 6:10, that which hath been is named already. He dropped my arm and exhaled, his face pallid and drawn. Grandma and I stood over him, bearing witness, sleep pelting the windows, that song about the owls, its searing guitar haunting me, like fragments of memory I buried with my childhood, grainy images of my mother in her yellow bedroom with her lavender incense and votive candles, her black and white photograph of a rock star standing on a stage at Kezar Stadium in 1973, dressed all in white, lips pursed, unruly dark hair framing a beatific face, guitar strapped over his shoulder, arms spread wide, as if he were awaiting crucifixion. The two of them were intertwined in my mind's eye, like ashes wafting in a summer wind, waiting for water to receive them. I was born of water and moonlight, and of her, and of him. Grandma stopped the clock on the mantel to mark the moment of my great-grandfather's passing. This halting time held power, then, forever now. She handed me a flashlight, then draped her overcoat around me, the scent of Jergens lotion and talcum powder lingering in the fabric. Go home, honey, she said. I shouldn't have brought you here. You didn't, I said faintly. I'd followed her from our farmhouse at dusk, trudged the quarter-mile past the barn and hog pen, through the woods where the footpath ended, as if I'd heard my great-grandfather's keening call. Go home, Grandma said, prodding me toward the door. I'll be along directly. I wrenched away from her and stared at my great-grandfather, the withered shell that remained, searching for some part of him that still looked vital, the outline of his body beneath the quilt. Legs splayed as if the cat he used to own were nestled between them, his arm dangling over the side of the bed. Grandma tucked it underneath the quilt her mother had made, tattered and yellowed with age, the same quilt that had covered her while she lay dying over half a century before, cancer ravaging her breast, flies swarming the window screens, attracted by the fetor of rotting flesh, all because her husband had believed he could heal her with ritual and prayer. I harbor a picture of that night in my mind's eye, my great-grandmother's bewildered stare, her mouth a perfect O, a last word half-spoken, an oracle undelivered. Now he was dead, his jaw unhinged, spittle on his grizzled chin, his only child by his side, the daughter whom he only recognized after she'd tell him her name, the name he'd given her 70 years ago. Do like I say, Grandma said sternly. I stood there breathless, my great-grandfather's milky eyes fixed and dilated, seeing nothing, seeing everything, boring into mine. Grandma cupped my chin in her hand. Don't look back, she said with urgency in her voice. I never had before. Not after my mother died. Like my great-grandfather, I had not spoken her name since. I had not heard her voice in a brooding summer rain, or felt her hand clasping mine in a sibylline dream, or seen her face in the shadow of a stealthy hunter's moon. I had erased her, and the sainted sinner who conjured music and magic from an electric guitar, his photograph in my mother's bedroom, her unfaithful talisman. I'd never looked back. Never. Until that winter's night in February 1988, when I was 18 years old. The past summoned like fire in my great-grandfather's shack, phantom owls crying in the night. It was inevitable. Perhaps it was even Providence. Now would return me to then. The tale demanded to be told. Whew.
So yeah, as you just read, Luna makes a pretty direct association between Jimmy Page and her mother. Intertwined, I think was the word used.
Yeah.
So how do you associate Jimmy Page with your mother? Or is there an association?
Not in that way.
Oh, yeah.
No, like I was saying earlier, my brother Steve was really enthralled with Led Zeppelin. And when I was 15, my mother and I had gone to church, and we came home. We did it other times besides just when I was 15, but I'm speaking of this particular, So we came home from church one day, and I was 15 years old, and my brother was sprawled out on the sofa watching MTV's broadcast of the Led Zeppelin concert film, The Song Remains the Same. This band broke up in 1980, so I missed its heyday. But MTV was showing a broadcast of that film that came out in the 70s. And, I'd heard their music, I had seen posters in his room, but it wasn't until that moment when I walked in and saw the screen, and it was Jimmy Page was on the screen when I walked in, and my reaction was visceral and instant, and it was just like he crystallized something that my 15-year-old self was missing at that time. He was so enigmatic, talented, but mysterious, and that just appealed to me. And so the connection to my mom is that she immediately recognized, oh boy, here we go. She just knew that I had immediately become very passionate about this group. So she sat through the film with us, and of course Steve watched it, and then they did an encore presentation that night, and by then Steve had gone off someplace, but Mom set up her ironing board in the living room and watched the encore presentation with me, only this time now I'm gesticulating wildly, and did you see this, did you see that, and she shortly thereafter helped me hang posters all in my room. And in 1988, which is when this book is set, Jimmy Page released his first solo album, Outrider, which is a prominent thing in the book. And I was so excited because he was going to appear on a 2-hour Rockline special where you could call in and ask questions, so I was going to get through. Well, thank you, Dad. You got me this yellow Princess rotary phone when I was a teenager, and that's what I had in my room. So there I am dialing that rotary phone or that over and over, getting the busy signal, hanging up, and just for about an hour, and not getting through and getting very frustrated. And my mother, who was quite conservative, kind of stoic, this very unpronounced personality, somebody who would never be interested in celebrity, and she's watching me freak out. And so finally, at the end of the first hour, she says, just go get a soda, I'll dial. And I had this vision of her, this memory of her dialing on that rotary phone for God knows how long, trying to get through for me. So, so her neurotic daughter could talk to a rock star. So she is, I do see him as kind of Jimmy Page intertwined in my relationship with my mom and my brother. And the book is kind of a love song to all of them. And Dad, I'll get you next time. So you'll be the next book. But that's sort of the connection there with her. Yeah.
So we've already talked about your setting of the first half of the novel is Full River, which is obvious, and in some parts it's obviously a Greenville stand-in. It's got references to Tar River, Town Common. So I figure you don't want to give too much away, but I am curious, how much was Greenville an inspiration to that setting? Also, Greenville people, how much were they a influence on characterization?
The last part of your question, not so much. Family, my mother's side of the family, my great-grandfather makes an appearance, a big appearance in this book. I even gave him my great-grandfather's name, Jesse Baker, and he really looms large in my imagination. My maternal grandmother used to tell me stories about him. He died decades before I was born, but he took a mail-order course on faith healing and tried to heal his wife, my great-grandmother Emily, of breast cancer, and that went about as well as it did in what I just read. She died apparently a horrible death, and But he still developed this reputation in town, and my grandmother said people would show up and knock on the door and want him to lay his hands on them and cure them of, say, a toothache or something. So in that respect, and I think they were in Beaufort County, so that's not even Pitt County, but that, to answer the last part of your question, no, the characters are really only him, based on a family member. Everybody else is pretty fictional. But you and I both grew up in Greenville in the 70s and 80s, and that was our home. So I didn't move around, you didn't move around, this was home. So I didn't want to call the town Greenville. I'm not sure why, I just didn't. Rivers play a big role in the book, so I decided to call it Full River instead. And there are lots of little nods to Greenville, some of which you mentioned. There's a mention of a roller rink, and I didn't name the roller rink, but Monica, you remember going to Sports World on, what was it, Friday nights in 7th grade? Yeah, that was the roller rink. And there, the town common, the fireworks, that was huge. We would go to the town commons on the 4th of July for the fireworks, and I'm assuming that's still big here. And the Tar River was, I don't know, I'm paying homage to my hometown in many ways, even though Claudia, Luna's mother, has a contentious relationship with her hometown. And she really wants to branch out and just never does, can't do it, and then commits suicide when Luna is 9. But it is a nod to some of the special places that I grew up going. And so what I'm going to read next is an excerpt from chapter 5, I think, and it includes a lot of those little mentions that, and at this point, let me just set this up. So after Luna's mother, Claudia, commits suicide, the family just blots her out. They don't talk about her, they get rid of her stuff, Luna's aunt says, look, we're not going to talk about her, we're going to, out of sight, out of mind. Luna will forget if we just do this. And Luna, I see her basically as having dissociative amnesia, where your brain shuts down after a traumatic event, because she witnessed the suicide. So she has blotted her mother out, and now in 1988, when Luna is 18 years old, the door gets it gets cracked open just a little bit with her great-grandfather's death when he mentions hearing owls, because that sparks a memory of a Led Zeppelin song called 4 Sticks, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But that was playing on her mother's stereo when she died. Well, what really kicks the door of memory open for her is when her uncle gives her Jimmy Page's solo album Outrider as a graduation present, and then it all comes back to her, and it's too much. She passes out and has, in her unconscious state, sort of a vision of her mother, and for the first time since she's 9, hears her mother's voice in her head, sees her mother, has this little interlude with her, in her unconscious mind, that is. And she decides, well, now when she awakens, I really want to face this now. I want to go back to that moment and really deal with this. And so the 18-year-old's logic is, well, how do I get back into that state of mind so I can see my mother again? Oh, I know, I'll do magic mushrooms. So she hits up a classmate for that and does do that. So what I'm going to read now, which includes some references to Greenville, is after that has taken place, her best friend Connie wants to know what gives. Why did you do that? And why have you been acting so strangely here lately? Because Luna has never spoken of her mother to anybody. And these are 18-year-olds, so they don't use the best language in the world. So I'll censor myself a little bit. You asked for it. I will a little bit. My daddy's here. I have to. So this takes place after both girls work at the KFC, which that was my first job too. So they've just finished a shift at KFC, and this is when this conversation takes place. Connie and I sat on the hood of her Chevette in the KFC parking lot and passed a can of Coors back and forth. Not that I would ever do that. We just finished, I didn't do that. We just finished our shifts, and the smell of sweat and fried chicken lingered on our clothes and in her hair. So how'd it go, she asked, leaning into me, as if she were awaiting the revelation of a top-secret message. She'd held out until now, longer than I'd expected. I took a swig of beer, then lit a cigarette, the searing red embers glowing in the dark. Come on, tell me. Denzel said you'd probably freak out. You should have let me come over and babysit. I didn't want company. She snatched the cigarette from my lips and flicked it into a mop pail beside the dumpster. I thought you quit. I did. What's with you lately? I gazed at the moon. It was full that night, pellucid, with a silver-limbed halo. Don't eyeball the moon, my great-grandfather used to say. Do you get yourself some bad luck? I was fettered to his folklore, just as I was fettered to my hometown. The back roads leading from Main Street to our farm, where Uncle Jack had taught me to drive. The public library, where Claudia, that's Luna's mother, discovered Arthur Rimbaud and Henry Miller, and read me poems by Sylvia Plath and Adrian Rich. The two of us huddled together on one of the plush sofas. The roller rink, where I had my 9th birthday party. The strip mall, where Connie and I perused albums in the record shack and gorged on donuts at Jerry's Sweet Shop. The homecoming dances in the high school gym I was never invited to. 4th of July fireworks on the town common. Uncle Jack carrying me on his shoulders, shielding me from the boisterous crowd. Paper sailboat races on the Tar River with my Brownies troop, the same river that would harbor my mother's ashes a year later. The road that twined between the hospital and Highway 264, then on to I-40, westbound, in pursuit of manifest destiny, just like Jack Kerouac, Claudia would say. She'd drive us in her VW Bug to the city limits and park on the side of the road and watch the cars streak by. Where are they going, I'd ask. To freedom, she'd say. Is that a place, Claudia? Yes, baby. Where is it? She'd pop a Led Zeppelin 8-track into the tape deck, then pull back onto the blacktop. Anywhere but here, she'd whisper. Do you ever think about leaving Fall River, I asked Connie, starting over someplace else? She cocked her head. Yeah, when I go to college. I mean now. And screw up my chance to be a mogul on Wall Street? Hell no. Connie zipped up her coat and stuffed her hands in her pockets. She'd planned her future when she was 12 years old. UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad, NYU for grad, then on to Wall Street, where she'd rule Goldman Sachs by the time she was 30. Failure was inconceivable. Her parents had made sure both of their daughters believed that. I don't know, I said. Expect poison from the standing water. What? It's from William Blake. Oh, shit. We've got a test on him and that other dude on Monday. Keats, I said. It wouldn't hurt you to read some of this stuff. You might like it. Yeah, well, it wouldn't hurt you to do your own trick homework. Besides, I hate all that ode shit. Who writes an ode to an urn? A line of cars pulled in from the boulevard and snaked around the building to the drive-thru. I pitched the empty can into the mop pail with my soggy cigarette. I needed shrooms because I wanted to see my mom, I said. The words penetrated the crisp air like a lanced wound. I wanted to grab them, choke them back down, undo my undoing. Connie's eyes fluttered. What do you mean? Something happened the night my great-grandfather died, I said. Something that has to do with my mom. Connie let loose a stupefied whistle and dug through her backpack for another Coors. Take it easy, I said. Big Brother's watching. They can't see anything from way over there. She retrieved another beer and handed it to me. She'd filched a six-pack from her dad's cache. He didn't keep count, and she wasn't greedy, so he never noticed when one went missing every now and then. You never talked about your mom before, she said, then hesitated. Is it true she shot herself? I grimaced. I don't want to talk about that. I cracked open the beer and took a sip. Felt the bitter sting as it raced down my throat. The bitter end. The bitter beginning. I couldn't figure out the taste of the middle, that amorphous gully in the narrow of loss. A couple days after my great-grandfather died, my uncle gave me this record, and I passed out and had some sort of, I don't know what it was. My mom was there. I could see her, feel her, hear her. I watched Connie's expression shift from surprise to incredulity. I know it sounds crazy, I said. I hadn't even really thought about her since she died. It was like I totally blocked her out. Now all these memories keep surfacing, only most of them are kind of freaky. Like they don't seem real, but I know they are. At least I think they are. I took another pull on my beer. Anyway, I just wanted to see her again after that, and I couldn't think of any other way. Holy shit, Connie said under her breath. You really passed out? As in hit the floor, passed out? I took her hand and placed it on the knot on the back of my head. Damn, must have been a hell of a record. You've heard Led Zeppelin, right? I said. She shrugged. Yeah, I guess so. My mom had a thing for the guitarist, Jimmy Page. She thought he put messages in their music about them, especially in this one song, like they were star-crossed lovers or some bullshit like that. Connie tapped her fingernails on the can. She had a congenital inability to fathom anything but the literal, the logical. What kind of messages, she asked dubiously. I should stop right now, I thought. Change the subject. Talk about something banal. The weather, maybe. It's freaking cold. Colder than usual this winter. Remember the last time it was this freaking cold? It snowed over 2 feet and that old lady who lived between Fall River and Grimesland froze to death in her trailer? What do you think is worse? Freezing to death or burning to ash? Talk about anything else. Or better yet, don't talk at all. I was betraying Claudia somehow. Betraying my family's silence. We'll go back to the way things were before. It'll be all right if we just pretend this never happened, Aunt Lorraine had said. Do you think the dead can see the living, I thought? Does their vaporous skin still smell of lavender and moonlight? Can they follow you from one room to another, command you to enter with a butterscotch whisper? I combed my fingers through my hair, found the knot, and pressed it hard. I wanted to feel the pain. I wanted to remember it, all of it. Before was rooted in now, a stopped clock on a dead man's mantle. Silence wasn't a panacea, a vehicle to oblivion. Not anymore. Connie nudged me. Come on, Luna, what kind of messages? I don't know exactly, I said, surprisingly calm. She'd get all weepy talking about it sometimes, though. No kidding, so they actually met? Yeah, well, I think so. She used to talk about going to a Led Zeppelin concert in Raleigh or Charlotte. Could have been Greensboro. As far as I know, she never traveled outside North Carolina, so it had to have been someplace in-state. One of the assistant managers emerged through the back door and waved at us. We hid our beers inside our coats and waited for him to jog to his car, then peel out of the parking lot. Connie handed me what was left of her beer. You finish it, I gotta drive. Just pour it out, I said. I gotta eat dinner and do homework when I get home, and I'm already buzzing. She grumbled something about not wasting perfectly good beer and took a gulp. So when was that concert? She asked, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm not sure, I said. Wait, winter 1969. She told me she got the ticket on her birthday. Late February 1969. Funny, I said, marveling at the circularity. She would have been the same age I am now when she went to that concert. Connie slapped my thigh. Good God, Luna, your birthday is in November. I know when my birthday is, so what? So you would have been conceived in late February of 69. And you said your mom told you she met Jimmy Page in late February of 69. I pushed her hand away. I didn't say for sure she met him. I just said she went to a Zeppelin concert. Why would she think he put messages about them in a song if they never met? She hopped off the car and began to pace in front of me. Can you imagine? You could be a rock star's kid. I snorted. Denzel slip you some shrooms too? No, really, think about it. Connie. She was gesticulating ardently. Seriously, do the math. Connie, get a grip. Jimmy Page is not my old man. She looked at me with a mix of revelation and bewilderment. Well then, she said, who is? So that sets that in motion.
I think just coming off that passage kind of leads perfectly to this question. Did you know early on how Luna's quest would turn out, how it would resolve itself? Now, I don't know how you can answer this without spoiling the ending, but
I'm
hey,
not
that's
gonna
all
do
you.
that.
Okay.
When I first started, well, I'm just going to stick with this incarnation of the story. When I first really started working on this, I had the first chapter. I mean, I rewrote it 18,000 million times, as Liza and Margaret know. And Liza was amazing and read final drafts and said, no, you got to cut about 50 pages of this stuff. And she was right. But so I had basically the first chapter, and then I knew what the last line would be. And I knew some key events, but I didn't, beyond that, no. And I don't outline And I think a lot of literary writers don't. Yeah, because it's our work is so character driven. Get to know the character, and it will kind of tell you what you need to do, where you need to go. And so I had some key events in mind, but it was terrifying sometimes, just sitting down there looking at the blank screen and wondering if the muse was going to show up that day. And often she did not. And she had better things to do. So there were many days when nothing happened, and then there were those eureka moments, oh, I know what to do with this now. And I knew that there were certain themes that I wanted to play with, like the mother-daughter relationship, grief, grappling with that. And I wanted to deal with the idea of art and myth and lore, and how we can use that to shape our own personal identities. And that's, to me, what this book is really about. So you don't have to like Led Zeppelin. You don't have to know who they are. It's the story, I think, is deeper than that. But no, I didn't really know where it was going.
So I'm going to pull out a bit. And so where do you think your novel fits in with other contemporary novels? Were you thinking of other novels when you were writing, or trying to avoid influence from other novels? I mean, how are you?
Yeah. Well, I sure didn't want to do what I did, and I don't know if Monica remembers this or not, but in 7th grade I wrote my first novel in pencil on notebook paper. I had read S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, and I loved that book. That was really the first book that grabbed me. And so I basically ripped her off and just wrote a retelling with a girl gang instead of the guys. So no, I didn't have anything in mind really when I started working on this book. Where do I see it fitting? Well, I hope it's more in that rock novel, literary fiction genre, like Jeff Jackson that Margaret was mentioning earlier. Jeff Jackson wrote a wonderful book called Destroy All Monsters, and I interviewed him for NCLR a couple years ago. And it's just an incredible novel. And since then I read, but I didn't read any of this stuff until I was either finished with the manuscript for Searching for Jimmy Page, or I was finishing it. I didn't really discover that rock novel literary subgenre until after I was sending out query letters. And you're supposed to put in a query letter, this is similar to blah, blah, blah. And I didn't realize, well, it is similar to blah, 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 but I didn't know who blah, blah, blah was when I was sending out these letters. So I read Jeff Jackson. He was great. Jennifer Egan, A Visit from the Goon Squad, won the Pulitzer Prize, and that's a great rock novel. Andrew's nodding. And let's see, Dana Spiotta, A Visit from the Goon Squad. So I hope, I've since learned there's this huge subgenre of these kinds of books.
Can you kind of give us what are some of the conventions of the rock novel?
Well, I think music is a vehicle in them. I mean, it's prominent in all of them. And the characters are certainly driven by music. But what separates it from, say, fan fiction is that it's so character-driven and so rich with subtext and nuance, and that's what makes it so literary. The writing in all of these books I've just mentioned is beautiful. So I would be lucky to fit into that category. Yeah.
So speaking of the rock part of the novel, you said in previous interviews that originally you included Led Zeppelin lyrics in your manuscript, but then you found out you couldn't get permission to use them. So, yeah, they. But I think it still comes through, like the actual,
I hope so.
If not the exact lyrics, at least the sort of mystical side of that Led Zeppelin goes for.
Well, I hope so, and I'll go back to the memoir. I had lyrics coming out the yin yang in that version. And I remember sharing some of that with you, Liza, and you said, it's going to be really hard to sell this. And I hadn't even really given that any thought about getting permission, and so I cut a lot for the novel, but I still had some in there. And it got accepted for publication with those lyrics in there. And I set about trying to get permission from the publishing company for the song lyrics. I'm waiting to this day to hear back from them. So that should tell you how difficult it is, and it's expensive too. So I found out Led Zeppelin, the surviving members, are notoriously protective of their work, and they don't grant permission very often. So finally, my publisher, Joe Taylor, who's wonderful, said, well, we really can't wait any longer to start printing advanced review copies, take out the lyrics. And I was crushed. I thought they added so much to it. And I thought, well, I'm sunk. What am I going to do? Well, I found out I could take them out, and I could do kind of a creative workaround. I could allude to them. I could play with the motifs in the songs. But I didn't really have to do direct quotes. And I think it wound up, Joe said he thinks the book is better for it, that the essence is there, but now we don't have to deal with paying for permission.
And to tell you the truth, when I read that you didn't include any lyrics, I was kind of surprised. I was like, I thought there were some in there.
I tried. No, but I wanted to get to the essence of the song, and the song 4 Sticks from Led Zeppelin 4, their 4th album, which turned 50 on Monday, and that's the one with Stairway to Heaven on it. That song is really crucial in my story. It's what's playing on the mother's stereo when she dies, but that song is so rich with imagery, like owls crying in the night, rivers running dry, running red, the pines crying. And I used all of that as motifs in my story as well. I mean, I was just so fascinated with the idea of the owl. I mean, the owl is such a symbol of the feminine, and ancient Christians associated the owl with Lilith, Adam's first wife, this willful, lubricious woman, they thought, i.e. a strong woman. And Luna is. And so, and some Native Americans associate the owl with protection and prophecy, and then some see it as an omen of death. And the great-grandfather says, owl in the house means death's coming, and it certainly does for him. So I just figured I can play with these motifs without quoting directly, and that's what I had to do.
And even though you didn't use lyrics, you did title sections after particular songs. How'd you go about attaching the songs to particular chapters?
Well, I knew the first section would be called 4 Sticks because of the song and the role that it played in the mother's death. And then as the story really revealed itself to me, then I divided the book into sections. So it's got 4 sections and a coda at the end. And when Luna, we find out that she is indeed going to make this journey, this pilgrimage to England to try and track down Jimmy Page, then I knew the section where she makes that decision is going to be Babe, I'm Going to Leave You, from Led Zeppelin's first album. And then when she actually does leave, she takes a night flight. So they have a song, Night Flight. And all these little coincidences, and maybe it's not really a coincidence because I just know the band and the music so well that I gave her a night flight, not even thinking, I can use Night Flight, the song. And it just, that works out well. Okay, great, I'll grab that. And then the 4th section is called Houses of the Holy, and because she goes to a bunch of Jimmy Page's houses in the UK to try and track him down. So that worked. And then the coda is the name of their last album, which Jimmy Page put together right after the drummer died in 1980. So that's how that worked out.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave or open up to questions if you... does anyone have any questions? I can bring the microphone to you if you'd like.
Did you go to the houses?
I went to every location that's mentioned in the book, and poor Jimmy Page, if he has security footage of me at his house, I probably do look like a stalker. He's probably thinking, oh my God, this is again. Because he has a house in England, in London, called Tower House. So I've been there, not inside, but outside. And the house that he used to own in Windsor, It's called Old Mill House, and that's the house where the drummer John Bonham died. I've been there. I've been to the house in Boleskine, Scotland, that he used to own, which Aleister Crowley used to own. And I'm missing one. Oh, Headley Grange, where they recorded the 4th album. Now, that was a special situation because I tracked down the owner online and wrote him a letter, sent it to him snail mail, and he invited me to come. So I got to go inside and see the Stairway to Heaven and walk up the Stairway to Heaven. That's where they recorded the 4th album there. So that was quite exciting. So yeah, I've been to these places.
He'll get it when he reads the book.
I hope so. I hope so. Mary?
Well, I know the book was just recently released, but I also know that you've been doing a lot of media appearances and interviews, including for like Led Zeppelin fan podcasts.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk about how the book's being received by fans of the band.
They have been amazing. I get emails every day from these people who, it's so gratifying, and it keeps me charged up because I'm starting to get tired at this point. It's when you put out a book, I've just discovered, well, you don't have any control over it after that. You don't know if people are going to like it. You don't know what's going to happen. So this keeps me charged up. So the fan base has been really welcoming to me. Yeah. And I want to give a plug. My fiance, Hub, is over here. And this guy has been with me for every reading, everything that I have done, just listening to the same stories over and over and over again. Yeah. So shout out to you. Thank you so much for all you've done.
Any more questions?